All right, so this is how to solve quadratic word problems when you're given the equation in factored form. And we talked about this example already. So you should watch the previous videos if you want more basic questions, because this is not going to be a basic question. So we talked about the three more common kinds of questions they could ask, which is they could ask for the vertex, the x-intercepts, or the y-intercept. They could also ask for sometimes another kind of answer. So I'm going to give you an example. They ask how high is the dolphin in 2 seconds. How high is the dolphin in 2 seconds? This is not a vertex question because they're not asking for the highest the dolphin goes, or the maximum height that it goes, or the minimum. So that's not a vertex question. But they did give you a number, because remember, if they don't give you a vertex, they have to give you a number. It's just that the number's not 0. That's the big difference. The number's not 0, it's 2. So in that case, it's not one of the most common ones, but still, you have a number and you know what it stands for. It stands for the time, the seconds. Well, which of the two variables stands for time? Because that's what is going to equal 2. So see if you can figure out which variable equals 2. Remember, you can always pause the video to see if you can figure things out and then restart it. If you said x equals 2, you are starting to understand these problems. So you're going to plug in 2 for x, because that's what it equals, into the equation and solve for y. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in. So -4 times 2 minus 3. And I'm going to get an answer. Notice that the only difference between this and the most common problems is that you're plugging in the number 2 and not 0. That's all. All right? It's not hard, but it's just that you kind of have to get used to answering more types of questions. So that's kind of like, because there's more kinds of questions that can be asked, it tends to be a little bit more intermediate level. So -4, let's go ahead and simplify this. -4 times 2 is -8. 2 minus 3 is -1. -8 times -1 is 8. So that's going to be an answer of 8. So how high is it in 2 seconds? It's 8 meters, since y stands for height in meters. Okay. Let's do one more like that. So what if they asked for how many seconds have passed when the dolphin hits, let's say, have passed when the dolphin is 80 meters below water. And this means that it's a height of -80. Okay. All right. So if they ask for this, then that means that they are giving you a number, and it's not 0, so it's not one of the more common problem types. And you have to figure out whether it's x or y. So go ahead and figure that out. And if you said it was y that equals -80, because y stands for height, then you're right. So you have to plug this into the problem. So that means it's not going to be plugged into x, but you're going to set the entire equation equal to this. So it's going to be -80 equals -4x times x minus 3. Okay? So this would be a more challenging question. I haven't seen so many of these with the factored problem. But we're going to go ahead and do this so that you can see an example of it for when we, in a couple weeks, if we get to the harder problems. So in this case, you have a quadratic equation, so you have two options. You can use factoring, or you can use the quadratic formula. Now, the only thing is, even though it's partially factored, you cannot use these factors because it does not equal 0, and that's what makes this problem harder. If it had equaled 0, it's already factored, but if it doesn't equal 0, it is only partially factored, because it only counts as factored if it equals 0. That means you can't use these factors. You have to undo these factors. So you have to go backwards one step, and you have to actually simplify before you do anything else. So -4x times x is -4x squared. -4 times -3 is +12x. you have to make this equal 0, so you're going to have to add 80 to both sides. So 0 equals negative 4x squared plus 12x plus 80. The next thing you're going to want to do is, now that it equals 0, now you can factor. So now you're going to want to do the factoring work you've learned. The only thing is you don't like having a negative leading term, and you don't like numbers being bigger than they have to be. And I just happened to notice that all 3 of these are divisible by 4. So I'm going to divide by 4 to make the number smaller, and I'm even going to divide by negative 4 because I don't want a leading term to be negative when I'm factoring. So negative 4 divided by negative 4 is positive x squared. 12 divided by negative 4 is negative 3x, and 80 divided by negative 4 is negative 20. Okay. So now I'm going to see if I can find 2 factors that multiply to negative 20, if you remember, and add to negative 3. So 1 times negative 20, 2 times negative 10, 3 doesn't work, 4 times 5, 10 times 2, that's a difference of 8, 1, 2, 2 times 10, we already have that, 3, 4, 5, that's it. So that means we're going to have to use the quadratic formula. So it's not factorable, so we're going to have to use the quadratic formula, so we're going to have to use that a equals 1, b equals negative 3, and c equals negative 20. So for the quadratic formula, you have to simplify it, set it equal to 0, and then use 1, negative 3, and negative 20, right? So after you simplify it, which you have to do for the quadratic formula anyways, the next step after you simplify and label the points is to write down the formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2b. So I'm going to plug in negative 3 for b, which this has a minus sign in front of it, which means the opposite sign of b. So instead of negative 3, it's going to be positive 3. Negative 3 squared, remember you're going to square the 3 and the negative, so that has to be in parentheses. Minus 4 times 1 times negative 20 all over 2a, which is 2. Negative 3 squared is a positive 9. Minus negative times negative is positive, so that's 80 all over 2, so that's 89. So that's going to be 3 plus root 89 over 2 and 3 minus root 89 over 2. And I'm going to cross this off because that's going to be a negative answer, and we can't have a negative amount of time. This I'm just going to do on a calculator. So let's go ahead and put that in. Divide by 2. Okay. And if they ask for an exact time, it would be 3 plus root 89 over 2 seconds, which only a really purist math person would want. Other than that, they're going to tell you to round to the nearest something. So I'm going to say round to the nearest hundredth, so it's going to be about 6.22 seconds. In 6.22 seconds, the dolphin would be 80 meters deep.